video is the beginning of our drugs and medicine unit. And this is one of the options that you are required to learn for IB. And in learning this, this will be all on paper 3 of your IB exam. So you will not have to worry about knowing drugs and medicines for papers 1 or for paper 2. So let me just say as a kind of a disclaimer that this unit gives us general information about drugs. Any kind of dosing information or examples that I give both in videos and in class is not to be interpreted as a way to use medicines. Like, I am not a doctor. IB is not using this to educate you on how to administer medicines. It's just an educational tool. So again, if you ever were going to use any kind of medicine, over-the-counter drug, or prescription drug, you would always want to follow a doctor's advice. Okay, so having said that, let's start this informational unit. So what is a drug? Now, this is the requirement that IB expects you to know, that a drug is, or a medicine is, any chemical that does one or more of the following functions. So it either will alter your incoming sensory sensations, it will either alter your mood or emotion, or it can alter your physiological state, so your consciousness, activity level, or your coordination. Okay, so, and it could include, you know, obviously your fighting infection, etc. So, what are the categories of drugs? Now, the ones that IB expects you to know are these. There are others, but there are infection fighters, which are things like antiseptics, antibiotics, and antivirals. And those can be both over-the-counter and prescription. There are those that affect body chemistry or your metabolism, like your hormones that you take or vitamins. And then there are those that would affect the central nervous system, which are things like stimulants, depressants, analgesics, which are both mild and strong. And an analgesic is just a fancy word for a pain reliever. And then there's also anesthetics, and those are things that you might think of as anesthesia, like when you go to the dentist and they give you laughing gas or they numb your gums, or it could be general anesthesia, like when you are completely asleep for a surgery. So some of the things that are pictured here, Bactine, you might have used that. That's an over-the-counter antiseptic. Some of the Tylenol, Advil, Bayer, aspirin, and Anacin are all pain relievers or analgesics. These colorful ones that look sort of like Skittles, those are meant to be vitamins. Insulin would be an example of a hormone, and then penicillin would be an example of an antibiotic. Now, there is something called the placebo effect, and I imagine it's possible that those of you that are in IB psychology or even regular psychology maybe talk about this, but it's something most students that I found over the years have heard of. Your body does have the ability to heal itself to some degree, and often this has been studied to a great deal, to great lengths. The placebo effect is kind of an interesting phenomenon. It's when a patient sees a measurable or observable or definite improvement in their own health, and it wasn't due to treatment. There have been studies where when they're finally doing, human trials on a new drug, half of the sample is given the drug they want to test, and the other half of the sample is given a sugar pill, which does not include any actual health benefits. But oftentimes there's a certain portion of the control group who receive the placebo that really do see a measurable improvement in their health because they believed that it was going to work for them. And so here's some cartoons that maybe help you understand the placebo effect. Now, there's a lot of time, energy, and most importantly, money that goes into the research process. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I did not expect you to write out a lot of this, but this is an example, or this part of the outline is actually asked sometimes by IB exams, so it is important to understand this. So research is very complicated, it's extremely time consuming, and oftentimes when you start, you really don't know what your results are going to be when you're done. Literally hundreds and sometimes thousands of chemical compounds are made and tested to see if we can get something that will help treat a certain condition without major side effects. So you can read the list of scientists, mathematicians, etc., that are involved in the research. And we are going to talk a little bit more about the research process when we talk about drug design much later on in this unit. Now, one last point for this video is, and we've mentioned this actually back in our organic unit, we talked about this when we talked about chiral molecules, but a worst case scenario is something called thalidomide. Now, in the 1960s, thalidomide was used in Europe mostly. It was prescribed. It was not an over-the-counter drug. It was a prescription drug used to combat morning sickness that some pregnant women were feeling in the early trimesters of their pregnancy. Now, you can see that it was made in West Germany, marketed mainly in Germany and Britain. It was available in 50 countries or so. It was never available here in the United States. But what happened as a result of prescribing thalidomide was, when you took this drug in early pregnancy, the women who had been taking it gave birth to children who had very, very severe birth defects, like missing or shortened limbs. If you really want to see pictures of this, you can Google children of thalidomide and find images of these kids that had these severe birth defects. Now, the reason that this caused so many problems, as they realized this was happening, it's a teratogenic drug. So teratogenic means that it's harmful to fetal development, especially when it's taken early on. So there were, in the 1950s and 60s, thousands of babies affected by these birth defects, and you can read the statistics here about what happened to them. But it was a very serious case, and thalidomide is no longer obviously used. What happened with the case of thalidomide is that one enantiomer of thalidomide fought the morning sickness, and the other one, instead of being harmless, actually caused these birth defects. So now thalidomide is banned worldwide, and it is not used for morning sickness, although I have read recently that it is used to treat leprosy, which we don't see much in the United States and in developed countries, but we do see in some third world countries. So that is the end of video 1, and hopefully we can, if you have any questions that you have based on this information, we can talk about them the next time we meet in class.